First and foremost, thank you. It is great to be here with you. I've been here for a couple gospel meetings, but I've not got to speak to you all before. And I would just like to thank you first and foremost because you do help support me and the work and the labor that I do at Lake Street. So you guys are constantly on the back of my mind as I pray for different groups that help me do the work that I do at Lake Street. So thank you very much. You know, as it was mentioned tonight, the ideal of fire and zeal that comes from it, it's just a great story, and I'm thankful for the assignment that I got because oftentimes this story is treated like a kid's story, you know, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and it's almost over kid, kind of like Noah and the Ark. It becomes very hyped, but I want to say this is more than just some kid's story. This is a story that is going to drive home zeal for God. And the things that these men will go through as we examine it and as we look at it will, I think, hopefully springboard us to want to be more zealous after we're done considering and thinking about this tonight. You know, fire. It's used many times in the Bible, as mentioned tonight. I appreciate our song leader and the excitement that he had as he was singing and leading these little kids in song and us in song and his questioning of them, because it kind of sets a tone for what we want to think about tonight. Tonight we're going to consider a particular passage in the Scriptures that we've all probably heard many times. You know, it's the story of three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the fiery furnace. And as we do this, I want to set the scene a little bit for us as we build into this. So my assignment was chapter 3, but we're gonna build back to chapter 1 and come forward to it just a little bit. Again, probably reminding you all of a lot of stuff that you know, but I think we need to be reminded. You know, Judah is failing right now. The corruption of its kings and the people have brought judgment from God, and now the Babylonians are going to be used by the Lord to punish Judah. And in Daniel 1, we're told this was during the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim. And we know historically that Babylon first attacked Jerusalem around 605 BC to set that stage. And as a part of this attack, Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar take as prisoners the beautiful and the intelligent youth of Judah. You know, they bring back the best of the young people who are in their royal families and are of nobility. And among these captives are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the names that their mama would have called them by. But we're going to know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as we study through this tonight. They're Babylonian names. These boys were young, they're probably teenagers, and they were forced to leave their home, setting this up, and their family, and live almost 1,000 miles away. They know in the back of their minds that their homeland is being invaded by a foreign country. They're away from all that now, and now they live forcefully in a different country where they are trained in the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. It's possible at this point that they've been turned into eunuchs, because this was customary at that time for slaves. To say that their life was hard, I think, would be an understatement. I've never faced anything like that. But these boys persevere. They refuse to defile themselves and break the law of Moses by eating the unclean foods that are put before them. And as a result of this faithfulness, the Lord gives them favor and compassion with the officials of the land of Babylon. God gave them knowledge and intelligence. And Daniel even was blessed with the ability to understand visions and dreams. And again, that's not for tonight's story, but we need to set this stage as we think about this. And this is all found in Daniel chapter 1. So, you know, if you go home tonight and want to refresh it again, read through chapter 1 again. So chapter 2 is about a year or so after in their new lives. In training in Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar, he has a dream. And we all know this account as well. He dreams of a great statue. And It's made of different metals and different elements. And no one could interpret this dream at that time. Nebuchadnezzar was so frustrated he was going to kill all the wise men because none of them could tell him what this dream meant. And God steps in and gives Daniel the interpretation that Babylon was the golden head of this statue, and the other world empires were prophesied, and then, of course, that the Messiah was foretold about, and Nebuchadnezzar was happy with this message. He liked being the golden head. And perhaps it's this dream and this image of the golden head that inspired Nebuchadnezzar's next move that we're going to see. Maybe it's that's what motivated him not only to be the head, but the whole statue. Because Nebuchadnezzar, king, builds a golden image, a huge image. Daniel 3:1 tells us it was 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. All right, since this is a VBS, even though I'm doing more of a preaching style lesson, but I brought a prop. Because how can you not do a VBS without a prop, even though we're in the adult class? This would be what a cubit might look like if they were working. There's a hole where they might tie a string through it and they'd keep it on their waist. And this would be the measurement, ranging anywhere from 18.5 inches to 22.5 inches, depending on which of the 6 different cubits were used. But as the Jewish cubit went and the Israelite cubit went, is about 18 inches. Egypt has their own, all the different nations at the time that were prominent had their own little standards because, everybody wants their own touch on stuff. But this would be a cubit. This would be what they'd used as you think about it. So he builds this image. It's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. We don't know exactly what it looked like. Maybe it was an image of a man like his dream in chapter 2. Either way, it would have been an architectural amazement to build something so tall and narrow at that time. This is 9 stories tall when you think about this. Okay? And it's located on a literal plain called the Plain of Dura, to give you a geographical point. This image would have been seen from a very long distance because of its height and because of the flat terrain that's around it. And it was made of gold, so it would have shone brightly in the sunlight. The structure would have been powerfully impressive and amazing. It would have stood out. And I've got an image that I'd like us to kind of think about what it would look like. This would have been something that would have caught your attention. Just like when the Jews would make their pilgrimage to Jerusalem during their feast, they would see the gold of the temple, and man, that would be impressive to them. This would be something that would have stood out like that. It would have been an impressive looking thing. But let's, for comparison's sake, to kind of think of what it was like, it wasn't much different than the Statue of Liberty. Our Lady Liberty, from heel to top of the head, is 110 foot tall. So she's 20 foot taller than the statue Nebuchadnezzar built. Now, she's put on a platform that makes it from ground to the top of the flame 305 feet. But statue for statue, that would kind of give you an ideal. And what do we do when we come into this great nation? When people come into that harbor and they see that statue, it's a symbol of status and power. Not much different than what King Nebuchadnezzar did with this statue of gold that he built. It would have been a signal of stature and power. And not only is it such a signature of stature and power that he goes on to say to the political leaders, and he made this decree to them, he said, whenever the music is played, everyone has to bow down and worship this great image. Well, of course, all the images give a little different take from artistry to artistry, but I hope you'll get the point here. This would stand out. So back in chapter 2, when Daniel interprets the king's dream, Nebuchadnezzar was so pleased that he made Daniel a governor. So let's get a little bit more of this backstory before we get up to chapter 3. Daniel's made governor of Babylon, and Daniel in turn requested his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be promoted as well. So these young men were in positions of high authority. And they were standing with the king. They would have been one of his, we might say, entourage. They would have been around him when these things take place. But they were native Chaldeans that would not have liked this, that a lowly Hebrew has such power. They would not, it would have been a strain. So when the music played and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow down to the idol, the other Chaldeans told the king. They tattled. They went to the king and said, look at what's going on here. Because they didn't want these Hebrews being a part of this group. You know, as a side note, as you read this, and you may be thinking something similar that I've thought before, is where's Daniel at this time? You know, he's governor of Babylon. The scripture doesn't tell us about it and where he is at this time. So the safest assumption that I think we conclude is that he wasn't around the plain of Dura. And at that time, he was somewhere else in Babylon doing whatever he was called on to do. But because of his past behavior of faithfulness to God, I would assume and think very strongly that he would be standing with these three if he was there currently. Another thing to remember, though, is not much time has passed here. You know, these boys are probably in their early 20s. Look at what young people can do. And think about the parade of young people that vacated these 7, 8 pews on each side here just a little bit ago. And think about the potential there is in those little fellas and gals that are walking out of here to impact stuff. You know, you think about their parents maybe. You know, this could be a whole separate lesson. We admire these boys for their faithfulness and their courage and their zeal. Clearly, they have strong character. But the foundation for that had to come from somewhere. And I would say it was from parents and the training they received as young children. It was early enough and foundational enough and strong enough that when they were together in a foreign land, they held to what their God said. Boy, let that be a lesson to us parents. Are we raising our children to stand firm without us? Okay, back to the story, though, because that's not my lesson either. You're going to see, I'll get a couple tangents in here, just little serps of things to try to put in here. But we're back to our story of King Nebuchadnezzar. And man, he is angry because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have not obeyed him. But he wanted to give them one more chance. He explained the command to these men in case they'd missed it. And he basically told them, you're going to bow or you're going to burn. And then comes, I think, an incredibly powerful verse. If you want to follow along in Daniel 3, 16 through 18. It says there, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he'll deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. I'd like to summarize these verses in this way. He can, he will, but even if he doesn't, we will serve the Lord. In this kind of opposition, that, my friends, I would say is the very definition of sovereignty. No matter what happens, we will faithfully serve the Lord. And that should be an image that we hold to ourselves dearly. That is a picture of zeal for God. You know, I'm impressed by these young men as I think about it. To have the kind of courage and dedication to God that they show and demonstrate away from home, it's easy when you're in here around everybody else to take a stand. But these young people, 1,000 miles away from home, possibly, eunuched, and in the presence of a foreign king are willing to take a stand among strangers and evil people in the face of death. If I can only have that kind of faith and strength. Well, now we're finally going to get to the fiery story that I'm supposed to talk about tonight. We're going to get into the base of this. King Nebuchadnezzar, in all his fury, demands that the furnace be heated 7 times as hot. And I don't know that this is the exact furnace, but it would probably look something like this. It would be a possibility of what it might have looked like for that time. Have it heated 7 times as hot. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tied up, and they were tossed into the furnace. It's possible that this was the very furnace that was used to build and construct the golden image that they wouldn't bow down to, because they would have needed something like this to build that image. So they won't bow to it, and they're thrown into the thing that made it. And it's so hot and heated that much that the guards who tossed them in died from heat exposure. So here we're at now in the text of Daniel 3, 24 through 27, if you want to be there with me to read along. And I know some of these slides are tiny on the reading, so follow along in your own Bible. It says there, "Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. And he said to his high officials, 'Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?' And they replied to the king, 'Certainly, O king.' He said, 'Look, I see 4, loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods.' Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire, and he responded, and he said, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here.' Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire, and the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regards to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their head singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them." Well, let's start digging into this a little bit and drawing some lessons from these verses. First, understand, brothers and sisters, that there will be times when we find ourselves in some heated situations. There'll come a point in your life where you will have to make a decision, and either you're going to trust God or you're going to trust man. Trust God. That's my plea to you. Trust God. Realize this. Walking with God isn't always the popular decision. It wasn't for them. These young men made the decision to go into the furnace because they insisted on following the Lord. They could have bowed. They could have had a mindset to say, there are 1,000 people out here in the crowd who would see us bow. We can kind of sneak over here and bow down. We can blend in. We can bow to save our lives. God knows my heart. It would have been easy to rationalize away obeying the king and the law of the land. But they didn't. They stood for him. They showed zeal. And just like as they did, there are times, church, when you are going to have to trust God and go into the fire. I know it's hot. I know it's been heated more time and hotter than ever before possibly, but you've got to trust the Maker. You have to know, as the old cliche goes, if God brings you to it, He can bring you through it. Yes, going in the fire means you may lose some family. You may lose some friends. But beloved, I'll tell you, that's what the fire is all about. When things get heated, dead weight seems to fall off. Think about it. When you find people that want to lose a few pounds, they'll go sit in a steam room somewhere and they'll sweat it out. As a result of sitting in that hot room and sweating, they lose a couple pounds. They want to lose that little bit extra. But not only must you at times walk into the fire, but oftentimes God will place you in the fire. And here's what I wonder. At the beginning, in chapter 1 and 2, it seems like Daniel is the spiritual leader. He chooses not to eat the unclean food, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego follow, and Daniel interprets, and the others support him. Maybe, just maybe, the Lord wanted to try those 3 young men's faith and see if they could stand on their own. If they had zeal that propelled them forward. Maybe that's why Daniel wasn't around right now, to test and see if these 3 could handle the fire. Maybe part of the reason the Lord's doing this is to strengthen those men. And the reason I suggest this is because there are many verses that show us that the Lord purifies us, and He tries us, and He tests us so that our faith can grow. What we need to understand is that the fire is not to harm us, but it's to make us better. You know, let's consider what Malachi 3:3 says. He will sit as a smelter. He will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and He will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. Friends, in order to produce the purest form of silver and gold, the refiner has to leave the precious metal in the furnace. And while it's in there, while it's in that fire, all the impurities fall off and burn off. I don't know if and there may be someone in here that's done some smelting before, but I learned a little bit when I was looking into this. You know, while it's in the fire, those impurities fall off, and to the untrained eye, it may appear like the silver and gold is ready to come out, but the refiner knows better. The final point to some refiners as they look at this is that as they refine this gold and silver to be the purest form that it can be, he knows it's ready because as he does this, he can see his reflection in it. It should almost be like a mirror, a perfect mirror. Well, that's what God does with us, isn't it? When we're put into the fire, when He's looking down on us and those impurities are still being purified out of us because of this fire, He knows. He's looking. He's allowing us to go through this purging process. And He allows us to shed these impurities. And just at the precise moment when He can look at us and see His reflection in us, He pulls us out. You know, I'll even go to argue on the side. It may seem a little unfair. After all, why do I got to go through this? You know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego may have been thinking that too. Why do I got to suffer this? Maybe we ask God, isn't there a better way you can train me? Right? Wouldn't that be a question I might want to ask? Isn't there a better way to get through this? Isn't there a better way to train me without going through some of these things? Deaths of a parent, or death of a child, or a loss of a job, or a foreclosure on your house, medical bills, sickness, persecution, ridicule of our beliefs. And we may say, God, how much longer do I have to stay in this fiery furnace? God, I've taken about all I can. But God is saying, not yet. I can't see my reflection in you. Sometimes we have to be refined. And His time is not our time. I'll tell you that. I've learned that over the years. I hear somebody maybe saying, well, I'm just going to give up. I can't do this anymore, right? I'm tired of this. How do I go on with this? But please don't give up. Please don't throw in the towel understand that just like the young men in this chapter, you're not alone. 3 of them went into the furnace. They were tied and bound. And the Bible tells us that Nebuchadnezzar saw these men loosed from the ropes, and a 4th man was with them, and the 4th man looked like a son of the gods. You know, you might be saying, who was this man? Verse 25 says, and the appearance of this 4th one was like the son of the gods. Verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servant who put their trust in him. You know, many religious people have said various different things on this. Some believe this to be a pre-incarnate of the Son of God, Jesus. Others think it was a divine being such as Gabriel. And you know, we're not here to deep dive this part of the study day. But the point of this was God was with them. God was with them. They weren't alone in this. This refining that they were going to, this furnace that was 7 times hotter than ever before, was with them in it, in the midst of it. I love the promise God gives to the Israelites and later reiterates to us in Hebrews. He promises us in Deuteronomy 31:6, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or tremble at them, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. With him with me, there's nothing I can't accomplish. God is with us in the fiery times of our life. You are not alone. You may be questioning, why am I still in this? But he's saying, not yet. He can't quite see himself to the point that he's supposed to in that part of the trial. Understand this, the king and all of his political buddies are standing around looking and waiting for these men to perish. You know, you kind of imagine that picture. They already had men that were, I got the right button. I like this image, even though it's kind of fuzzy, you can see bodies laying at the foot of the steps. These men knew what this was to do. Their guards couldn't even get close to it, yet these men are in the midst of it, and now there's a 4th. Nebuchadnezzar gets it. What was his reaction to all this? To the faith of these 3 men, the unbelieving king declared, the true and only God is most high. I could have left it there. Let's look at Daniel 3:29. It says, therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in the way. Well, if that's not a statement, limb from limb? So this heathen king now makes a proclamation that if you disobey the true God, this will happen to you. Their faith in God's miracle proved to the world empire at that time who was the true Lord. There's no question. No question at all. That is revolutionary. That is making an impact on the world and politics and people. They made a difference. You know, I don't know for sure, but of course I'd like to think that after enduring the fire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thankful for going through it. But you know, think back on times of your life when you've went through fire. It sometimes takes us a little while getting away from it. before we see the hindsight of what took place back then. But not only did it prove to the world who God is, but it also literally, physically blessed them. Because then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. Now, I'm not saying we'll prosper, all of us, if we do this. It's not a health and wealth gospel. But there are blessings sometimes. And these men that changed a nation by being zealous for the God of heaven saw some benefit to this. So, sometimes it's hard, but what we need to do, though, as church, thank God for fire. And that's hard to do sometimes, especially in the midst of it. There are situations we are in, it may not be for me or you, but so that the glory of God can be revealed. It may not be about us at that time. The struggles and the trials and the hardness of what we're facing may have nothing to do with us. It's about the glory of God being revealed to others. Verse 27 makes an amazing observation. It says that when they came out of the fire, the officials looked them over, and their clothes had not been burned, and not a hair on their heads were singed. The Bible says that their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. This is a miracle in itself. You know what? I'm glad I don't look like what I've been going through. Because you'd see me up here in a heap right now. Got my tie on, I got my shirt pressed decent for tonight and coming here. I look put together, but I'll tell you, I've been a mess. I still am a mess. I'm glad I don't look like what I'm going through. But these men went through it and came out and didn't even show signs of it. That was a miracle. What we have to remember is the truth is the fire isn't meant to harm us. It's meant to purge us and to cleanse us. It's meant to get rid of those impurities. It's meant to help us be zealous for the Lord. You know, I think back in days past, though, you know, I was a volunteer fireman for years, and you'd go on the scene of a fire, but you don't even have to be a fireman to get this illustration. Go sit by a campfire, and can you go home and not smell like smoke usually? But these men went through this, and not a sign of it was there because they were faithful to the Lord. Well, a little bit more, and we're going to wrap up some of this. In Isaiah 48:10, it says, "Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction." I don't know about you, I think I'd rather have fire sometimes. That affliction part's hard, isn't it? That persecution's hard. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up in front of everybody else, though, and stayed standing. James 1:2-4. I'll have this down on about the last slide. I'll be ready and clicking it twice like I should. "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." And Isaiah 43:2. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you." Here's the point out of this. God didn't deliver them from the fiery furnace. He delivered them in the fiery furnace. That's how delivery came for them. Family, you're going to go through some stuff. Awful stuff. Stuff that you don't want to go through. And you're going to be scared. And listen, I'm certain Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were probably terrified at some point in this. They didn't have a death wish probably, but their faith was bigger than their fear. Remember that statement? Even if we die, we stand with the Lord. They knew that God could deliver them. They believed God could and would do it, but even if He didn't, they would not give in to their fears. So when you find yourself going through fire, when Satan, our enemy, will try to trick you into believing that you're being consumed by fire and that you're all alone, I want to encourage you to do this thing as we taught the kids, and we probably learned when we were little. Everybody remember stop, drop, and roll? Stop your fear. Stop your fear in its place. Drop to your knees and start praying, and roll all your cares over to the Lord. Put it on Him. He's the one that can bear it. We can't. We can bear it with Him, but we can't be the ones to bear it. I'll tell you, hard, fiery situations of life are not fun. I don't think anybody in here would raise a hand and say, "Did you enjoy that?" If we knew some situation that you'd went through. And I'll tell you, it wasn't fun for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be thrown into a fire, but God was with them through it all, and God was glorified. I want to leave you with one more passage, and I think these are true and comforting words from the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter 1, 3 through 9. And I haven't put the whole caption up here because, well, I did, but you can see I had to make it small in some ways. But let's read 1 Peter 1, 3 through 9. It says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to His great mercies has caused us to be born again to a living hope, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to obtain an inheritance which is imperishable and undefiled and will not fade away, reserved in heaven for you who are protected by the power of God through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time." Listen to this last point here. "And this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor to the revelation of Jesus Christ. And through you, and though you have not seen Him, you love Him. And though you do not see Him now, but believe in Him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls." I love what Peter tells us here. He says, all our trials and our testings of our faith, and that they'll result in the praise and glory of Jesus. We should thank God for every opportunity He gives us to be tried. It's a hard one to say, because I don't like praying for that. It's like praying for patience. It's like praying for being more long-suffering. You have to be given something to make you long-suffering. But he says we should be thankful when we're given these opportunities to stand up and to announce that we're on His side. We should be confessing to the world, "For God I live, and for God I will die." And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. And we can do it too. We need to show our zeal for the Lord and how we live. And the next time we have trials, notice there are 3 of them went through this trial. My little added point to this lesson is that oftentimes we think we can do it by ourselves. They didn't go through it by themselves, friends. They had each other. How often do we bear our trials by ourselves and not let our brother or sister know what we're going through? Take example from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I knew saying those names so many times I was going to just stumble over them tonight. But take courage. You might be surprised. There's someone else here tonight going through something too today. We aren't an island. Stand. Go through the fire so that we can come out on the other side, trusting in the sovereignty of God. Thank you for your time tonight.